Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on what part of the world you happen to be watching our little stream on. Welcome back to A Walk on the Geek Side, where we are further continuing our journey into the Silmarillion and the Undying Lands and talking about people with pointy ears and such. I am here with Skep.
Hey, everybody.
And the ever lovable Sage.
Hello, Internet.
So I think the question from last week was, I'm gonna have to go into the DMs. That's the only thing I didn't have pulled up.
Don't worry, I remember. Okay. The thing is, let's give people a chance to show up our massive audience of 3. But the last question asked last week was a follow-up question. The first question was basically, are Tolkien's elves almost comparable to Dungeons and Dragons elven subtypes? And the answer is, to a certain degree, yes, except that as we tried to explain last time, the Tolkien dark elves are not evil and they are not underground troglodyte with a black skin. They are purely and simply elves who never... it's purely simply the expression for elves who never undertook the Great Voyage to Valinor. But the follow-up question was if whether or not the specific subtype of elves were genetic in Tolkien, like they to a certain degree are in... it's an almost genetic interest in what they're doing, like it is in Dungeons and Dragons. And in Tolkien, no, it's not really. It's far more of a cultural thing. Yes, the Lyquendi, as we would understand them, the green elves that we mentioned at the very end of last time, the people of Denethor coming into the very eastern Beleriand, when all the other elves was already settled, basically, can, to a certain degree, correspond to Dungeons and Dragons wood elves. But again, it has nothing to do with any kind of... I mean, a Lyquendi could go to Doriath and become a grey elf, a Sindath, very easily. It has everything to do with the fact that where they are living is right in the middle of a great woodland area, and their level of technology they find attractive and useful are primarily leather, bows, hunting, gathering to a certain level. Just like the difference between the Vanya and the Noldor is basically that the Vanya is a group with genetic predisposition of blonde hair, while the Noldor is black, and you know, the Noldor's hat is smithing and creation, while the Vanya is basically being poets, artists, musicians, and so on. But again, it has nothing to do with anything in particular. If there is a Noldor who had any particular interest in one of those things, he would just do it. The point I'm trying to make is that Tolkien's comments are not in any meaningful shape or fashion defined by genetics, because all elves are elves.
Yeah.
And they are all just the same elves, really. They have done different things and have different culture and different civilizational desires. But genetically or, you know, inborn culturally, they are exactly the same people. Okay. Anyway, we now have the Eldar in Valinor. We have, as we mentioned last time, we have the great divisions of the elves back in Middle-earth. We have Thingol and his Sindar in Doriath spreading out across Beleriand. We have Denethor and his green elf Lyquendi in Osiriand. And we have Círdan and his Falastrim, the coast elves, around the Falas Havens, Eklarast and Brithombar. Those are in Middle Earth. Then further east in the nations we know later, we have various degrees of Mori, Quendi, or Avari. The primary group is the one under Lenvi, who would have settled up and down the Anduin. All of my goodness. But all of these will be disappearing as we go on. In Valinor, again, we have three sort of separations. We have the Teleri, the Sea Elves, who have settled on a stretch of coast right outside the encircling mountains at Alqualonde, and basically started creating ships because they couldn't quite bear to live entirely not under the stars. And then we have the Vanya and the Noldor settling in Tirion at a pass through the Pelori, where they build a great city with a tall tower from which Ingvi, the supreme high king of elves for all times, held his council. However, after a somewhat short while, the Vanya drew ever closer to the Valar, and specifically to Manvi and Vada. So eventually they abandoned Tirion and went to live with them on the slopes or in settlements around, either in Valmar, the city of the Valar, or on the slopes of Taniquetil, Manvi's mountain. So Tirion was left to the Noldor, who was then ruled by their old ambassador, Finvi. It's at this time that people start having children. Ulve, the ruler of the Teleri, have children, but they are only relevant insofar as who they marry, so we'll forget them for a while. Ingvi has a son, possibly called Ingvion. It's difficult to say because he shows up sometimes in Tolkien's writings, and in other parts it's like he's not even there. Also, the fact that the Vanya doesn't really come into the stories of Middle-earth means that they are interesting but not particularly relevant. The Noldor, however, is super relevant, because their king Finvi marries a girl who is the daughter of a famous smith. At this time, the Noldor gets very close to Aule, and he starts to basically help them become great craftsmen and smiths and artists, creating metalworks and works of stone, jewelry for the first time, golden jewelry, and especially starts making jewels, precious stones. Apparently, that is something you can create by the art of smithing in Lord of the Rings, especially if you're an elf, because that's what they're doing. Of course, it should be assumed that they are basically being taught how to, cut jewels down from, its raw form into something pleasing. So that is what the Noldor's hat is. Drawing close to Aule and becoming great craftsmen and smiths. Now, if anyone has watched the streams we have done the last couple of times, you will realize that being close to Aule and being his protege is not necessarily the straight route to sainthood. I'm looking at you, Sauron, Saruman, and probably others.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, of course, being a great smith and great craftsman and so on is not a bad thing. Aule is not a bad guy. He just has some trust issues insofar as he trusts people too much from time to time. Anyway, the Noldor starts breeding, and all of the elves start actually getting to be a great people at this time. They will never be as numerous as men, of course, but you can assume that in Valinor, which is basically the earthly paradise without any kind of danger, they will have they are living there for, again, almost, oh god, I can't remember, almost 3,000 years probably, at least 2,000 years. So they will have time to get children. Finvi, the king. Now this is where things start getting interesting and perhaps a little bit complicated. But Finvi has a wife, the daughter of one of the famous jewel and metalsmith of the Noldor race. And those two together have a son, Feanor. His elven name is something like Kuru Finvi, which means son of Finvi or something, but his wife names him Feanor, the fiery spirit. Feanor has been mentioned. Yeah, that's our boy. Feanor we have mentioned repeatedly as a naughty boy in the history of Middle-earth and the whole Tolkien legendarium, and he certainly is a naughty boy. But that's not to say that he is irredeemably evil, at least not at first, or for that matter, irredeemably, completely terrible. He is without a doubt the finest mortal, insofar as elves are mortal, but the finest mortal smith and of the children of Iluvatar. He is the finest smith and craftsman who ever lived. He creates jewels we are in his early career, so we'll get to his most prominent creation later. But he creates jewelry and metalwork like no one has ever seen. He creates the closest. I mean, Tolkien's world is not really replete with magic. It's not a high. It's really funny because it's high fantasy without any real degree of obvious magic, but elven craft can very well get close to it, and one of the things Feanor creates is a little something called the Palantirs. Every Palantir in Lord of the Rings and in every other story comes from this dude right here. We know of the 7 that the Dunedain had, but in all probability he would have created many more. Because those were the gifts given of the elves to the Númenóreans, and I sincerely doubt they would have just handed over everything they had. So Feanor creates the Palantir, and he, again, because Feanor is going to a certain degree, be the villain going forward. It's difficult to, it's easy to lose track of the. Sorry, is it ever addressed if elves have a longer gestational time than man? Tolkien played around. Grilling Pirate Pete. Tolkien played around with the question, but never really got around to anything. So sometimes he felt like elves, if not gestated longer, then at least took longer to mature. Other times, and in most of his writings, it seems pretty obviously that it probably wasn't so. So it's difficult to say. There isn't really any clear language. Anyway, Feanor. Like I said, we'll get back to Feanor today. Actually, he is incredibly important, and he will become a very naughty boy. But again, it's worth noticing that in these early days, he is without any doubt. He is the greatest. Even Gandalf, who has been through the whole thing, talks about Feanor with a certain level of awe and respect. He is very, very important, and he is very, very good at what he does. Feanor himself eventually marry and have 7 sons: Maedhros, Maeghlor, Celegorm, Caranthir, Curufin, Amrod, and Amras. These are not super important as of yet, but will be either at the end of today or beginning of next stream and going forward. But he has those 7 children. Curufin, who is his 5th son, but is described as being closest to his father in nature, personality, and closest to his heart, by the way, is the father of Celebrimbor. So yes, Celebrimbor, the ringmaker, if you want to call him that, is actually the grandson of Feanor. That's probably where he got it from. And of course, you can see a direct correlation between Fëanor's relationship with Melkor and Celebrimbor's relationship with Sauron, although from different starting points. Anyway, Celebrimbor is so. Fëanor's spirit. Like I said, Fëanor has this fiery spirit. And it is so powerful that his mother basically, his mother Miriel, by the way, expends so much of her inborn powers that she basically wastes away and dies. Because Fëanor, giving birth to someone as, powerful, if you will, as Fëanor, basically takes too much out of her. It's like a very physical expression of postpartum depression. Even if it takes a couple of 100 years, and she eventually dies. Now, as we have been talking about, elves dying in Middle-earth is not something they can really do. Elves who are dying are basically, their spirits immediately go to Mandos for rest and recuperation, and then when they are ready, the Valar has a responsibility to re-embody them and get them back into the world, because that's the fate of the elves, to be eternally in the world. Miriel, on the other hand, refuses to come back. She says, I am tired of this, I cannot be bothered, I don't want to have anything to do with you, let me stay here, Nina, Nina, Nina. This is surprising. This is probably the first time, and maybe even the only time we know of, where a spirit of an elf has chosen not to come back to Middle-earth if the choice was there, or to Ada if the choice was there. Finwë, for a while, then becomes... Finwë mourns her, but then when she refuses to return, eventually he becomes somewhat bitter and starts going on trips out into the countryside alone to get over it. And that's where he meets his second wife, Indis, a noblewoman of the Vanyar. And he eventually marries her and has three more children. A daughter named Findis, who we don't actually hear anything about, and two more sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin. At this point, Fingolfin and Finarfin are thus sort of the mixture of high-level Noldor and Valar blood. And both of those are also going to be super, super important, especially through their children. Fingolfin has the children of Fingon, Turgon, Aradel, and Argon. And while we don't hear much about Argon because he will die probably before the end of today, or more likely next time, the other three are going to be incredibly important. And in the final, in the published Lord of the Rings, if not the final conception, Fingon, that is Fingolfin's grandson, son, is the father of Gil-galad. Although everything indicates that Tolkien did not intend that and Christopher misread something. Finarfin has the three sons, Finrod, Angrod, and Aegnor. All of those are going to be very important, especially Finrod, in the rest of the Silmarillion, but his primary descendant is his daughter, because Finarfin's daughter is Galadriel, and I don't think anyone has either read The Lord of the Rings, seen The Lord of the Rings, or listened to these podcasts, or live streams, without having some idea of how important Galadriel is.
Right.
Yes. This is our Galadriel, by the way, the one from Lothlorien.
She aged well.
Sorry?
She aged well.
Yeah, she really did. Anyway, Finwë has this new marriage and these extra sons, but Fëanor is very pissed about this. He is of the opinion that one, his father is dishonoring the memory of his mother, to which he has a certain point, except that it's made clear that it's basically a choice. By choosing to remain in the halls of Mandos, despite the opportunity to go back, Miriel has basically given up her claims on, any rights she have from marriage or anything else.
Yeah.
It's by the way the only example of a second marriage we hear of in the entire Tolkien legendarium regarding elves. Otherwise, elves, probably to match up with Tolkien's Catholicism, is exceedingly one-sidedly lifelong monogamous.
Yeah.
Even when their wives die or husbands die, we never hear about an elf who remarries. It simply doesn't happen. Again, because they are reborn into the world, or at least has the potential of being reborn into the world. Death, in their case, it's not even, to have and to hold until death do you part. It's to have and to hold until the fucking world ends.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very special situation, but because Feanor has these emotions, he was always quick to anger. There's a split between him and his son and his brothers and their sons, which will absolutely come back to haunt the Noldor in a very, 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 very short while. In fact, actually, let's go there, because we might as well go there. No, actually, let's not. Let's take it chronologically. So despite this split between those particular families, it's mostly family drama at this point. It's mostly sniping at each other over the Christmas table. Or at Thanksgiving holiday, whatever the elves have. It's not a civil war or anything yet. It's basically an older brother being pissy at daddy's new wife's children.
Right.
And of course, the other children are probably trying. I mean, Tolkien doesn't really describe it. But I'm sure the others, especially the brothers, are not letting him get away with it, even though it's made pretty clear from Tolkien's side that this is a very one-sided. This is a one-sided feud.
Yeah.
And I just got a text. Can you guys talk for like 30 seconds while I just answer that very quickly?
Sure. His description of Miriel, for those of us that have played the tabletop Middle-earth role-playing game, is probably why, under the description of elves, it says that they are undying unless they become weary of life and lay for the eternal rest. Because since they come back, their rest is, basically going to the beyond and coming back. And with Miriel refusing to do so, that's actually a quote-unquote, for lack of a better phrase, a true death for the elves, which is probably how it was interpreted in the role-playing game. So there is that, because any of us that have played the role-playing game have, like me, obviously, when you read the description of the elves, it says that they are an immortal race, save for mortal wounds, and when they become weary of life and decide to lie down and take the long rest.
Yeah. Basically, when an elf dies, this is very simple. When an elf dies, their spirits go to the Hall of Mandos. It's like a Greek underworld to a certain degree, only without the eternal gloom. His halls are strong as stone and inescapable prison, but they are not like you're just walking around down there looking very sad. It's a place for the spirit to rest and recuperate until such a time as it feels ready to be reincarnated, at which point the Valar has a legal requirement, so to speak, imposed upon them by God to resurrect someone. The Valar has, under certain circumstances, the right to withhold, or not withhold, but to delay the reincarnation if they feel the spirit is not ready for it, which will come into play later. But that's basically the metaphysical sort of life concept of the elves. according to the dwarfs, they themselves are gathered in other places in the halls of Mandos, connected to the halls of Aule, where he takes care of them, but no one actually knows. What we do know is that when it comes to humans, our spirits also go to Mandos, but rather than rest there, they then travel to an unknown beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly only the Valar knows where they're going, but they are not telling. The elves don't know.
Hello, old grouchy gamer. In regards to the Elvish squabbling, Pirate Pete wants to know, is it based on Britain's royal family since Tolkien is British? He's assuming it was part of Tolkien's schooling. Oh, shit. We lost.
Did Sage just drop off?
I think he accidentally dropped off. We got to wait for him to come back.
Come back, Sage.
Last week it was me. This week it's him.
Yeah.
Welcome to the stream, everybody. We have a W.R. Costin. My hubby's in the chat, Grillin' Pirate Pete. All questions are welcome. We usually wait until the break in the action to have the ever-lovable Sage answer them, or anyone else who is more knowledgeable than me. Since I have been scrambling around trying to get up as much money as possible to help Ronan with the bills, I kind of was negligent in my homework.
Yeah, nobody really knows why I'm here, but I'm here. I don't contribute anything to the stream. I just sit and listen to Sage.
Okay, here we go. Bink! There he goes.
I got kicked out.
I don't know how.
I know how. I got kicked out of everything. My internet failed, purely and simply.
Oh.
That was annoying. Where was I? Sorry, I got kicked. Probably the Elven squabble is not referring directly to any specific part of the British royal family. Elements could probably be made to the sons of Henry II, although they were all from the same mother. But I think it's one of those situations where there are plenty of elements throughout history to lend inspiration, but Tolkien mainly based it on the fact that he needed this family squabble to exist for the further development of his storyline. Anyway, so that's the situation now. The elves are going freely. They are going to Swanhaven to visit the Teleri. They are going to up the mountain to hang out with Manwë. They are going down to wrestle with Tulkas, hunt with Orome. They are living in the earthly paradise. Basically, the closest thing we can probably get to the Elysian Field. The Elysian Field description, or even the Egyptian mythology. The Egyptian afterlife, or the Greek Elysian Fields, are probably the closest thing we get to similarities in known mythology. It's literally paradise, only on Earth. The gods live there, or the closest thing you got to gods who are actually in the world. Then 3,000 years have passed since Utumno was overthrown, and Manwë feels that his older brother seems to have repented his evil and is ready to be set loose in ever-increasing segments of freedom. Several people argue against it, mostly, of course, Tulkas, Orome, and to a certain degree, Mandos. But eventually, Manwë's judgment is made, and Melkor is released. He is not allowed to leave Valinor, and he's supposed to. He basically has his what's it called when you have to check in with someone every week or so to show that you are still playing nice.
Progress report?
Sorry? Yeah, something like that. You still have to make progress report. You still have to be a good boy. But he's allowed to go free. And being Melkor, he, of course, immediately starts looking for something to corrupt. Because, no, he has not in any way been redeemed. The Vanya and the Teleri both reject him. The Vanya at this point is living very close to Manwë, and they don't like what they are seeing. The Teleri the Teleri doesn't really care about him because he really don't care about the sea, which is Ulmo's domain, who is probably his greatest enemy of all time. And he's they're probably also beneath his notice, really. But the Noldor are craftsmen. They delight in creating and modifying things. Basically the same way he got hold of Sauron and a lot of other spirits that served him. He goes amongst the Noldor and helps them, teaches them, helps them reach great. Yeah, that's probably his physical form at this point, insofar as he takes one, except for the crown, which is obviously a later thing. But he goes among the Noldor and helps them and teaches them, and many of them achieves greater and greater skills at this point. The only one, and this is where I like Tolkien, the only one who abso-fucking-lutely refuses to deal with him is Feanor. Feanor hates him. Oh, bye, Maddie. Feanor...
I'm still here.
Yeah, I said bye, Maddie. Feanor hates him. But, again, there is very little... but it's probably also his greatest tool amongst the elves, as you will later see. Because Melkor still manages to whisper poison in his ear regarding his brothers. And the family squabble begins to become more than just snide comments at the Easter parties.
You're talking about whispering in Feanor's ear, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not directly, but then through his sons or something. Feanor himself, like I said, don't want anything to do with this dude. Maybe it's just because he senses something in him. Probably it's because Feanor is an arrogant piece of shit who recognizes another arrogant piece of shit.
There's that possibility.
Black Soul recognizes Black Soul to a certain degree. But it is also at this point, but again, Melkor is walking amongst the elves, seeking influence, helping the Noldor reach ever greater levels of smithing and creation. I'm tempted to say creationist heights, but of course not creationism as we would understand it philosophically these days. Then Feanor decides to go into seclusion for a while. And, okay, if anyone is actually out there watching this stream, now is the time to start paying attention. Because this is probably the single most pivotal moment of the entire damn Legendarium. Feanor goes into seclusion for a while, bringing some water from the wells under the great trees. And when he comes out sometimes later, looking pale, thin, haggard, and worn out, he is bringing with him the 3 greatest jewels the world has ever seen. Nothing anyone ever made, apart from the world itself, is more important than these things. We are talking about the Silmarils, of course, from which the Silmarillion has its name. Somehow Feanor has taken a jewel, an unknown crystalline form that he probably invented himself from some kind of mineral, shaped it into a multifaceted jewel, and captured the light of the 2 trees within it.
Do you think I'm sorry.
No, go, please.
Do you think there's any possibility that he sought or received divine help in the creation of the Silmarils? It's just so important.
I think
to the story.
I don't know. I mean, personally, this is Tolkien. This is Tolkien, and this is Eru. I will not be surprised if you tell me that Eru had something to do with literally anything in the story. Even if it comes down to Aragorn smoking his first pipe, because it somehow has great cosmic significance.
I'll tell you why my thought goes that way, and this is all speculative. I have no evidence to this at all. But here's why I speculated that way.
Please.
I understand, as you do. I may not appreciate it with the command of information that you have, but I appreciate the importance of the Silmarils, my friend. These are absolutely, the ring is a piker compared to the importance of these gems.
Yeah.
And so these gems, people thought nothing of not just sacrificing lives, sacrificing armies to obtain these gems. People took impossible risks. People walked in to the presence, just fooling a god to rip one of these out of his iron crown. I mean, they took amazing risks. They would do appalling sacrifices to obtain these gems. Why wasn't there, since Feanor had been successful in creating them, why were there not other attempts to create them? The answer that
was.
Well, why were there not other successful attempts to
because
create
they couldn't.
them?
Yeah, because they couldn't.
No, I realize.
No,
that.
I get your point.
With this.
Yeah.
Okay. There were other. Why was nobody else successful in recreating something like this? Well, and the answer to me comes down to they did not have divine help that Feanor had, and that implies that he may have had some advantage in taking the materials that he had and creating the pinnacle really of creation in that world.
My opinion of it is that I think you're putting I'm not disagreeing actually. I think you're putting too much focus on the actual creation process. I think Feanor was the way he was because of divine intervention. The only one who could do it was Feanor, because he was, without a doubt, at least potentially and within his own powers, the greatest mortal ever in the Legendarium.
Right.
No one can match up to Feanor. No one.
Got an ego to match.
He probably matches most of the Ainur, to be honest. I mean, Feanor is probably a better creation smith than Sauron. And I don't think Eru was down there giving him a hand with the creation of the Silmarils. I think Eru, insofar as he had a hand in it, had a hand in creating Feanor as he was, to give him this opportunity.
It was the special ability, the thing that created the Silmarils was fundamentally inside Feanor and wasn't the result of, could not have been the result of an intervention by
It would explain why even he could not do it again. It's made very clear in the story that if Feanor tried to replicate the feat, he would have been unsuccessful, even though he had access to the same material and obviously knew the process. In all probability, he had this super divine... It's worth noticing that after this, we don't actually hear Feanor do important creation work anymore. My theory, such as it is that he had this divine spark that no other mortal or children of Ilúvatar was allowed to have or ever given, and it was expended in the creation of the Silmarils. All of the other stuff, the Palantir and all the other really great creations, are basically before the Silmarils.
Okay.
So that's my theory at any point. The point is, he creates them. These three jewels, shining with their own inner light of the trees, but transformed and hallowed, because this is also important. When they are being shown, everyone is so freaking impressed that Vada herself takes them up and hallows them in the name of the Valar and in the name of Eru. These are super important. Literally everything in the Legendarium, from this moment on, the rings, Numenor, Gondor, Arnor, the Hobbit, everything Tolkien writes about can be traced back to the Silmarils, one way or the other. So yeah, this part is part of the test. If you can go through, when we are done with this, in a blue moon, in 3 years, and are done with this theme, or this world, or whatever.
Our grandchildren will take over the stream when we.
Yeah. If there is one thing that will be on the test, the first question on the test is the single most defining moment of Tolkien's Legendarium beyond the creation of the world itself, and that's right there, Feanor's creation of the Silmarils. And again, it's worth noticing that after this, Feanor never is mentioned doing anything great again. It's like, this is the pinnacle of my art, and everything I will do after this will feel cheap and small.
Well, I mean, I can see the reasoning behind that, and I can see your theory.
Hell yeah!
And the fact, because you're taking basically ethereal and godlike trees, their light, and harnessing it into 3 jewels. It takes everything he has in his essence to create these, and then he's spent afterwards.
Yeah, like I said, that's my theory, because it is especially meant no one else could do this. Not Melkor. Not even Melkor could have done this. Only Feanor. That's why I believe Skep is right that there was some kind of divine intervention involved. I just think it was placed a lot in him a lot earlier rather than during the actual creation process. I think he spent that divine spark that had allowed him to do all these great things, finally just unleashed it into the Silmarils, probably part of his own soul, probably the good part of his soul, because from now on, Feanor's trajectory is downwards. I cannot emphasize how much he's going to start being a naughty boy now. Anyway, he is showing these Silmarils off and start wearing them to great holidays. And the elves are very... I mean, it's one of those things. This is actually a very good picture of it, but it's important to notice that Tolkien basically says that it's impossible to show the Silmarils in art form, because they are not just shining with this inborn light. The light is holy in a way we cannot imagine if we don't actually face God's immediate creation power ourselves.
Right.
You have to remember, now I'm not super religious. I'm sure many who watches this are not, but when we're talking about Tolkien's Legendarium, we have to work from his framework, and Tolkien was very religious. So whether you are out there an agnostic or an atheist or a believer or whatever denomination you maintain, looking at the Silmarillion is... Looking at the Silmarils is basically looking at the inner light of God himself.
Like the burning
to a certain degree.
Sinai.
It's basically like looking into the Ark of the Covenant without being turned into a melting skeleton in Indiana Jones.
Right.
Although that was God's wrath, I think. But the point holds. Melkor sees them and is...
That was God's... Are you looking at me?
Yeah, basically.
Moment.
Yeah, basically. Moment, yeah. And a bunch of Germans couldn't take it.
Evidently.
Melkor, even if he had been even partially on the way to redemption at this point, just stops dead. His soul, such as it is inflamed with, lust and desire. I will use lust a lot in these podcast live streams.
I've used it a lot in my lifetime.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I would like to point out that I use lust in its overall use rather than the pure sexual one that seems to be dominant in modern day language.
You use it in the desire sense.
Yeah, exactly. Overwhelming desire, basically.
Right.
Overwhelming non-rational desire. Lust.
Yeah. Yes, that gets in the way of reason.
Yeah. And he is willing to do fucking anything to get them. But, remember, Feanor loathes him. Feanor allows other people to see the Silmarils. Sometimes he even allows others to hold them for short amount of time. He's even willing to almost trade one of them away to Galadriel if she's willing to give him a lock. Actually, let's do this story now. Feanor and Galadriel never gets along. Galadriel at this point in the story is basically Feanor as a woman. She doesn't have his power and she's golden-haired instead of black, but she is also the greatest. Tolkien describes her as the greatest woman of the Eldar, the greatest female elf of all time, in inborn power and grace and beauty, etc., etc., etc. And in these early days, she's also an arrogant bastard. Or bitch, I suppose.
Whichever one.
And she doesn't get along with Feanor at all. Probably because in many ways they are so alike. But Feanor is almost obsessed with her hair. It's impossible to show in them. I actually wish that's the one part in the movies where I wish they had CGI'd it up a little. Because Tolkien's description of her hair, I mean, yes, it looks fine, but it sort of needs something. Feanor, who creates the Silmaril, is so obsessed with the damn thing that he is willing to trade practically everything he owns, down to and including maybe even lending her Silmarils for an extended period of time, for a single lock of her hair that he could then do something with regarding a jewel. And
now think of that gift that she gave to Gimli.
That's what I was going to get, but yeah, you take that one.
Well,
exactly.
That was the Gimli asked for a hair from her golden head, and she gave him 3, right? Three.
He asked for a single hair, and she gave him 3 of them.
Yes, and that which she would deny an elf with essentially divine status. She denied.
Not to mention her own cousin, by the way.
Yeah, right. Her cousin, a couple of ways actually.
Well, her uncle, really, but nonetheless.
Yeah, but yeah, and so she gave as a gift to a dwarf. That is so Galadriel. That is so elegant and so wonderful and makes me so happy.
And if you have read the whole story, it's such a wonderful double finger to Feanor.
Oh yes.
And at the same time, it's actually a very pivotal moment because more than anything else, there are other things Tolkien mentions, but more than anything else, that is probably the proof to the Valar that she has repented the folly and arrogance of her youth, and is thus allowed to break the ban. Because Galadriel, we will get to. There's something called the ban.
We're getting way ahead
of
ourselves now.
I know, but I'll just say there's something called the ban of the Valar. We'll probably get to that actually today, just before the end.
Yeah.
And Galadriel was one of the primary leaders who was heavily under that ban.
Right.
And giving those hair to Gimli, as she refused to do to Feanor, might very well be the moment where the Valar is okay with saying, okay, good.
Yeah.
We believe you. We believe that you are a good person now. Anyway, back to the storyline.
I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when Mandos told Feanor what she had done.
Yeah. Holy shit.
What?
She fucking what? You what, mate?
Yeah.
I
offered her the most holy
I couldn't resist.
She turns me down and gives her hair to a fucking dwarf.
I mean, if you have ever heard of Elven anguish, that would probably be the moment.
For real.
For real. Anyway, the point is, Feanor at this point, while he is an arrogant piece of shit, he's still willing to, lend out his stuff and let people touch them and so on and so on. Keep them going, wearing them at parties and so on. But Melkor is not even allowed to see them. Not even allowed to see them. Only when something happens where he can sort of see them in public. Again, it's worth noticing that despite what comes next, Feanor absolutely hates Melkor. Hates him. Hate. Again, the reason I'm overemphasizing this is because I'm spending a lot of time about what a naughty boy Feanor is. But again, it's worth noticing that he is not a servant of evil as such. He's basically...
This is not one of those things where the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
No.
These were enemies of enemies.
He's basically just a man with a lot of anger in him, a lot of anger and arrogance in him, and it leads to bad situations. But he wants to be good.
Could I make a comment about Feanor? Because I've really been enjoying your characterization of Feanor, and that a lot of otherwise knowledgeable people who I talk to and have conversation with, the subject of Feanor comes up, and they say, "Oh yeah, he was the master craftsman. He must have been a great guy." No, he was not a great guy. He was, to me, Tolkien was what is Satan's favorite sin? Pride.
Yeah, pride.
And to me, he was the pride archetype.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That Tolkien wanted to put in there. And to Roman Catholics, that is pride is a deeply, deeply insidious and scary. Ironically, especially when you think about the Pope just for a minute. Okay, now stop. Pride is a deeply insidious and very scary sin to Catholics because it is so insidious. And I think that was the point that Tolkien was trying to make. That was what he was trying to write into that character was this is what unstoppable pride, what unchecked pride gets you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I'll stop. But even in the face of unbelievable talent and goodness and beauty, pride can spoil it all. That's what I was trying to say.
Absolutely. I mean, insofar as you can say that, you cannot take 7 characters from Middle Earth and put them in positions of the 7 deadly sins.
No. I wasn't trying to do that. I know trying to do that with pride.
I know that, absolutely. I know you're absolutely not. I'm just saying, if you could, Feanor would be pride. Like, not even up for debate.
Yep.
Anyway, Melkor is starting at this point to create... What Melkor is doing is far more insidious. He is basically the god of evil and to a certain degree. I mean, he is Satan. Melkor is Satan. We can say that very easily. He starts whispering to other Noldor, "Hey, did you hear what Fingolfin said about his big brother? He's going to usurp the kingship, probably push Finvi aside." And I mean, because he is also descendant from Ingvi, he feels that he is he's the rightful heir to the high kingdom of Noldor, and so on and so on. Like I said, at this point, the elves are the split in the Noldor royal family is becoming far more than a family squabble. It's in fact getting so bad that for the first time in the history of their race, the elves are starting to create weapons. That is the one thing the elves have never done before. No matter what else they have been smithing with Aule, no matter what else they have been done, they have never made weaponry. Because what would be the point? They are not waging war. They have no one to wage war on. Hell, some of them would probably not. I mean, they would probably have knives and tools and so on. But the concept of weaponry, as in tools dedicated solely to the point of harming other people, I don't think it even came into their minds in many ways. Now the split is getting so bad, the elves are starting to make weapons, just in case. That is probably... Melkor did a lot of bad stuff, but one of his great triumphs would have been that moment when the first elf elongated a knife into a sword. Elves like swords and spears, we know this. And eventually things come to a head when Feanor basically attacks Fingolfin, draws his sword on him, and almost attacks his brother. This is the time then when the Valar steps in and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Like, whoa! We need to have a chat here, people. And the two then and eventually their judgment is that Feanor is to blame. Feanor is to blame. He's too angry and too quick to react and so on. So he is basically sent into exile. He's not put into prison or anything. They are hoping to heal the split, but he's basically sent away from Tyrion, and because his father loves him so much and probably feels that he is somewhat to blame for the whole Miriel situation, he goes with him. And they, in the north of Valinor, they create a fortress called Formenos. It's actually described as a fortress, which is also a new thing for the elves. Creating a house primarily based on your protection in paradise itself. No. But that is what happens. So this is not good. Unfortunately for Melkor, this is good for Melkor. He has split his primary enemies away from the Valar to a certain degree, and definitely away from each other. The problem is, Feanor isn't stupid, and he knows that Melkor has been saying these things, so he really don't want anything to do with him right now. In fact, when Melkor comes up to Formenos to try to have a chat with him, Feanor slams the door in his face. Again, we are used to the medieval stories of Satan and even modern day stories of Satan, where the fact that standing up directly to the devil is not something special. But if you actually go by the fact that Satan is, in essence, a lost archangel, and of course Melkor is the greatest of all the Ainur, telling him that he's a complete dog shit eating asshole and slamming your door in his face is actually, give Feanor credit. That's actually pretty hardcore.
That is pretty hardcore. Looked at that way, yes, I would agree with you.
Feanor does it because, again, he's an arrogant, easily angered teenager, basically. Yeah. But still, the actual action of doing it, didn't he get up like the Decepticon in the last Transformers movie? Thanks, Dave D. Murphy. Yeah, something like that. Looking at it from the perspective of what Melkor actually is, remember what Melkor does to other people who meet him. Remember, we are getting ahead of ourselves, but just to my co-host, remember what he does to Luthien when he actually looks at her.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is actually pretty neat. Anyway, things go on for a while, and Melkor decides, "Fuck! I can't do anything here. I need to find a new tool." So he sneaks away. He sneaks away and hides for a while. He actually manages to pass through the pass at Tyrion and gets to the outside of the Pelori Mountains. At this point, he won't return to Middle-earth because he wants those Silmarils. That's literally all he's thinking about. But he needs to think, and he needs to be away from the watching eyes of the Valar. So he sneaks out. We will get back to, in 10 minutes or so, what he was doing once he's snuck out. But he's not there for a while. In the meanwhile, the Valar wants to sort of heal the breach between the brothers. So what they are doing is they are hosting a great meeting between the various factions of Noldor. And they are basically like, listen, you guys, we know Melkor did this. We have sent people to try to arrest him. We haven't found him yet, but we know he did this. Can you two not try to start playing nice with each other? And Fingolfin and Feanor publicly bury the hatchet. How much Feanor actually is serious about this is
a matter of debate.
Certainly a matter of debate considering what happens later, but publicly they bury the hatchet, with Fingolfin even saying something like, you are my great brother, or my big brother, and you are, the one who shall rule us, and I will follow and help you to the end and beyond. Mandos at this point is looking a bit, this is bad. And it's going to be bad. This is going to be bad. But they are sort of getting together on a more formal, they are formally, making up with Fingolfin, basically, again, placing himself under Feanor. Like, you think, or you are afraid that I'm going to try to usurp your position as the crown prince of the Noldor. No. Dude, I'm okay with being your younger brother. You are Feanor, the creator of the Silmarils, the big kahuna. I'm good with this. And so life goes on, much as it has in these last few years. And then Melkor finds a spider. More specifically, he finds a Maya spirit. Probably a Maya spirit. We don't actually know what she is. One would assume she was
why
one
do I
of...
have it fixed in my mind that she is definitely a Maya spirit?
Probably because Tolkien indicates that very much in his text and also in the history. But at the same time, he's also hinting that she might be something else entirely. However, he and we also know that doesn't really fit in with his legendarium. I suppose you can say she might actually be like a mid-stage Ainur between the level of Valar and Maya. Like more powerful than most Maya, but not quite a Valar. That's my interpretation of her. Like a super okay. Maya.
That's almost, that's sort of the way I was. Although I didn't think of her as being a special class. I thought of her as being a Maya who was more powerful than, say, Gandalf.
Yeah, I mean, she is definitely, if she is a Maya, she is definitely one of the most powerful out there.
Right.
Like I said, I like to think of her as, she is, in all probability, one of the Ainur spirits that followed Melkor during his rebellion during the Great Music. But whether or not she followed him into the world and fought with him within Arda is more doubtful. Anyway, at this point, she is taking the shape of a gigantic supernatural spider living in a cave outside in Aman on the outside skirts of the Pelori Mountains where the lights of the trees can't reach. And what is interesting about you will notice her similarity to Shelob, of course. That is because Ungoliath is Shelob's mother. Mom. Shelob only more, like much more. Shelob is in effect just a spider. A powerful, magical, giant-sized, talking spider.
Who is immortal.
But, well, at least unending life, probably not immortal, but...
that's what I meant. When I say immortal, I mean...
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm sorry. I'm being a smartass. Right. But...
You?
Yeah, I know. It's a shock. I mean...
You can become so pedantic.
I know.
Not you personally, but one...
No, I know.
One may become so pedantic about the stuff that it can become tiresome. I don't mean to get that way. It's just I have certain concepts, things that
Yeah.
are almost like prejudices in my mind. Stuff like I always thought
Yeah,
of
that
being a Northern Island.
that would be Goliath, by the way.
Yes.
I knew if I started far enough, I'd find one that depicted.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. She's like, the point is, she's like Shelob times 10. And like Shelob, one of the things she does is she feeds on light.
Yes.
Now, what is what is Melkor's deal with her? Well, he is basically saying, you help me, and I will get you all the light you can feed on. Light like you have never, ever thought of before. And so, one thing she can do that Shelob couldn't do is she can basically extrude webs of sheer darkness. Her webs are not really spider webs. Well, they are, but they are made of sort of living darkness. And hidden by those webs, the two goes over the pass of Tyrion one more time. No elves are there, but the elves out at Aqualonde, the Teleri, is almost shivering in fear because of some evil they can sense but not fully understand. But those two are now re-entering Valinor. They have been out there for probably another century or so, or at least close to it. Remember, these days are... the years pass more slowly in those days. There is a great party going on in Valinor. Everyone is there. All the elves and Valar and Maya are gathered in the great city of Valmar, the great city of Valinor. And they are partying and everything is going as it should be. And at that moment, Melkor leads Goliath to the two trees, and he stabs one of them with his black sword, and she sucks up its very light and essence, and the tree withers and dies. He then goes to the other one, stabs it again, and she sucks up the essence, and it withers and dies, and she swells and becomes monstrous. Like I said, she's already Shelob times 10 at this point. Now, oh boy! Can I
relate something back to something from the very beginning? Remember that Melkor
you can relate everything.
was the one who liked to make the music that was discordant and different from everything else.
Yeah, rap music, I know.
This transformation of Ungoliant into a massive, gigantic thing. Can you imagine the happiness and sense of accomplishment?
Oh yeah,
he felt as he achieved that at the expense of something beautiful that had been created.
Oh yeah, this
is just him doing the same thing again.
I mean, this is him.
That's what I love about Tolkien is he's very consistent. Pardon me.
Oh yeah. And he understands what evil is. Evil is, in its essence, petty. Evil rejoices in hurt and destruction, while, to be honest, creation and, love is far more difficult things to achieve.
Yeah.
Anyway, the light, of course, goes out, because this is the light of the world. There are the stars in the outer world, but this is all the light there is in Valinor. Poof! Nothing. It's nighttime. And of course, everyone starts panicking and mills around. They can figure out something is going on here, but they are milling around and things are very, very bad, trying to find him, but they don't know where he is and they don't know Ungoliant is with him. So in the confusion, Melkor and Ungoliant reaches Formenos. Now, Feanor is in Valmar for the party. Again, it's basically a celebration that he made up with his little brothers. Finve remains at Formenos, and he denies Melkor at its gate. And Melkor at this point is basically not gonna happen, and he kills Finve. Probably a single sword stroke. Boom, dead. So the first of the great ambassadors are gone.
Yep.
Finwë is dead. Melkor and Ungoliath slaughters everyone left within the fortress and steals every single jewel they can lay their hands on, including the iron casket containing the Silmarils, and flees north. Maddie, can you put on the world map, the one we talked about that just shows the entire world?
Oh, yeah. Shit. Hang on. Give me a second.
Yeah. Anyway, Melkor and Ungoliant at this point flees towards the north. While, of course, eventually down at Valmar, there is eventually managing a certain calm and collected situation where they figure out what is going on. At this point, everyone is basically slightly panicking and crying over what happened to the trees. But Yavanna says, we cannot recreate the trees, but we can give them life again. Feanor, if you will give us the Silmarils, we can break them and use the light caught within them to resurrect the trees. Yeah, this is the map I'm looking for.
Yeah.
This is like a composite map of all of Arda, the entire Tolkien world. A lot of these things does not exist at the same time. In any way, like you can see Numenor in the middle, who absolutely did not exist at the same time as Beleriand, and the lamps did not exist at the same time as the trees, and so on. But towards the very north of the map, where the two supercontinents are meeting, there is a land or a land bridge of cracking ice and icebergs called Helcaraxi, the grinding ice. Like a constant, it's basically like the North Pole, except that it's not completely deep frozen. It's a grinding sea of icebergs colliding and crashing against each other. It's the white area, and the two villains are fleeing towards that area. Again, this is not an entirely accurate depiction of Arda, and the world has, and at no point did it actually look like this, but I wanted specifically to show you what Helcaraxi is. Anyway, Feanor is being told he can bring forth the Silmarils, and they can recreate the trees, render Melkor's attack on them, if not null and void, then at least, heal the thing. And this is probably the defining moment of Feanor's villainhood. Because he says, no, ain't gonna happen. Those are mine and I'm not giving them up. You couldn't protect your trees. Don't look to me for a way to save them. A girlfriend.
Pride.
Of course, even if he had agreed to give them his damn jewels, he couldn't have done it because Melkor had already stolen them. But again, this is one of those things where especially someone like Tolkien would understand the concept of taking the prideful path versus the path of humility.
Humility, yeah.
Right.
He could have said, okay, I'll do this, and if he had done this with all of his heart, things might have been very different. But no, he says, no, ain't gonna happen, and leaves. At that point, or turns to leave. At that point, news comes that his father has been killed and his home has been ransacked. And as you can imagine, he is not exactly happy about this, but he basically, for now, just leaves with his sons. Eventually, all the other... Melkor and Ungoliath is gone. Tulkas and Orome try to hunt them as much as possible, but they were basically lost in the dark webs that was extruded by Ungoliath, and the two escape into Middle-earth. Eventually, no one is really at a mood to party anymore. Also because it's like very dark. There is no light, remember. The stars are shining outside of Middle-earth. So this is probably very, very dark. The only light here would be torches. So eventually the other elves return to their own homes, and the Valar try to decide on what to do. Back in Middle-earth, Melkor and Ungoliath reaches Middle-earth, and then, of course, they start to quarrel. Because Melkor had promised Ungoliath a lot of those jewels. She was already huge and monstrous and had fed off the trees, but she wants more. If there's more, wants more. And she is basically getting so big and so powerful that Melkor, Satan himself, doesn't really dare take a fight with her. So he has all of the jewels, except for the Silmarils he got at Forminos, he is giving to her, and she is devouring them and becoming very, very, very powerful. I mean, she keeps growing bigger and bigger and bigger. But at this point, can you go back to the picture you had of Ungoliath, Maddie? The one we really liked?
Tabbing through. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go.
Okay, so we have Sauron. Sauron is a big dude. We have all seen the prequels, the Lord of the Rings movies, where he appears in the prologue. Melkor is probably a lot bigger than him. He's basically described as a mountain walking. So he's a big fellow. That is probably Melkor with the light in his hands, and Ungoliath as she is after she has devoured both the trees and the jewels of Forminor. But Melkor doesn't want to give her the Silmarils. In fact, he is like, no fucking way. I did this for these things alone. You have all the others, but you will never have these. And because both of them are evil, Ungoliath says, yes, I will. And if you won't give them to me, I will have you as well. And she attacks Melkor, wraps him in her webs of darkness, and basically hurts him with her power. Melkor yells out in pain, and it is so loud, it rings in. They are on a coastal plain with high cliffs on the landward side. And he yells so loudly in anguish that the cliffs ring by them, and it spreads out across most of the world. In fact, for as long as Beleriand existed, this was not an area that many people lived, for obvious reasons. It was a desolate wasteland even before these two came along. But the story goes that ever after, if you went to those cliffs and yelled out, you would reawaken Melkor's old shriek of anguish in the echoes, and it was like, imagine hearing the devil scream in anguish. Again, this is actually not a good thing. The deepest pit of evil feeling anguish has to be soul-destroying when you actually hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't go to Lamoth and start shouting, guys. It's probably unwise.
Right.
But Melkor shouts in anguish. Someone hears it. I'm sure there are elves who hears it somewhere in Beleriand and doesn't know what's going on. But you remember that Melkor's western fortress, Angband, was never destroyed after he was taken. And in Angband lives, of course, Sauron, and more importantly, what remains of his Balrogs. And this is where a lot of the discussion about the Balrog wings come from. Because the Balrogs arose from the pits of Angband and passed over the Ered Angren, the Iron Mountains, like a storm of fire, and descended upon Lamoth. So basically This can be read in many ways. Maybe they're just walking really fast and are, after all, fire demons, and it looks like all of the Balrogs are there. Or they are actually flying on wings of fire. It's difficult to say. Like we discussed all the way back in, I think, episode 1. I am of the opinion that Balrogs probably didn't fly too much, but they are spirits of fire, spirits of demonic fire, and if they wanted to have wings, they could absolutely form them. Anyway, the Balrogs descend upon this struggle between Melkor and Ungoliant, and they are tearing. This is one of those things where this have to happen for the story to progress, but theologically it doesn't make much sense. Ungoliant can cow Melkor himself. Ungoliant can frustrate Orome Tulkas and all of the Valar, but the Balrogs descending on her tears her shadow webs apart and lashes her with their fire whips and drives her away. Balrogs are hardcore. Super hardcore, and they are probably Tolkien's most, in some ways, badass creation. But they should not be that powerful in my mind. I would like to assume that they lost quite a few of their people in the process. How many This is actually a good time for that. How many Balrogs were there? We don't know. In some early parts of the story, it seems like there are hundreds of the damn things. In the very last part of Tolkien's writings, he describes them as there probably never was more than 7 or 8. Personally, this is just my theory, Skep, I'm sure you have yours. Personally, I would believe there might have been around 10 or 12. Originally, that's like a dozen.
That's my mental picture, was that there were 8 to 10.
Yeah, probably like a dozen, and some of them were lost in the battle with Ungoliant. And they stayed around 8 to 10 for the rest of the First Age.
They wanted to go after Ungoliant, didn't they?
Yeah, they wanted to follow her.
They were going to kick her ass, and
they were going to slaughter her.
Morgoth said, "Yeah, nah. Let's cruise home.
Yeah, we need to go. We need to go home, guys." So instead, they bring Melkor back to Angband, where he now sets up his new primary fortress. He welds a many-spiked iron crown, wherein he sets the Silmarils. To always, he never takes off the crown. Now, of course, he's a god. He doesn't really need to sleep very much, although I suppose physically he does, maybe from time to time. But he is wearing this crown for the rest of the story. Every time you hear of Melkor, you have to imagine him. Yeah, that's probably Melkor with Sauron. You basically have to imagine Melkor as this shape of gigantic horror with an iron crown with the 3 Silmarils. It must have been a weird situation for his creatures and his servants. Because Melkor is like the very pit of darkness, dissolution, corruption, and evil. And then he has the Silmarils on his crown, which is the very opposite. It's a weird. It must have been a weird situation for them. To be completely honest.
Could have been and putting them in the crown and showing him, and showing all of his minions, for lack of a better term. I have the power to harness the very holy light itself. Don't fuck with me.
Oh, that's absolutely what he's doing. There's no doubt about it. I'm just saying it must have been a weird sort of mix of seeing Melkor and seeing the Silmarils at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes. Studying contrast.
Yeah, studying contrast, processing both at the same time. Anyway, Melkor is now back on his throne, and basically the first thing he does is start rebreeding his orcs and trolls. He had already created trolls, probably from stone, maybe from captured, and Treebeard says he created trolls as a mockery of Ents. That's probably true. How did he create trolls? We don't know, but the fact that some of them at least can be turned to stone with the sunlight proves that trolls are probably not in essence living creatures until they are modified later. They are probably some sort of construct, even if made by
animated stone, kind of.
Yeah, even if made by a sort of stone-like flesh. Yeah. But he starts breeding his orcs and trolls again, and he sends them out to start. He realizes they are the elven kingdoms of Beleriand, and he breeds his armies and sends them out to conquer. In a great battle, where Thingol gathers all of his allies. He cannot have this. Thingol will know that Melkor has returned to Middle-earth because his wife, who is of Ainur after all, Maiar after all, would have told him. But he gathers all of his forces, and there is a great battle. The first of the 5 great battles of Beleriand, and it's theoretically, I suppose, it's a victory for Melkor. Denethor, the king of the Green Elves that led them into Beleriand, is killed, and his people are harried back to Osiriand, where they then devolve into small barbarian kind of tribes, and never again, except for one more time, otherwise never again participates in the Great Wars.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about the battle under the stars?
No, that's the next one. I'm talking specifically about the first battle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thingol defends the borders of Doriath, and there is great slaughter amongst the orcs, but he can really do nothing else but defend his areas. The forces of Morgoth are simply too strong. Remember, the elves had only just started smithing weapons in Valinor. Now, I am sure, because Sauron and the others were in Angband, the elves of Middle-earth had learned to do weaponry, but definitely not to the quality that they would have later. And there is some indication, maybe even that the Lyquendi went into battle with stone tools. At least it would be very possible. So the Lyquendi is driven back and is defeated. Their king is killed, and they are driven back and become devolving into smaller tribes in Osiriand. Círdan and his people are driven back to their 2 harbors and besieged there, though holding out. And Thingol is holding out in Doriath, because this is where his wife comes in the picture. Melian, at this point, creates Melian's girdle, which is basically... This is probably where Galadriel learned the trick that she later uses in Lothlorien. Melian basically creates a magical, if you want, field around Doriath. That means that unless someone has a greater will than her, which basically means Melkor, probably maybe Sauron, but probably only Melkor, unless they have a greater will than her, they simply cannot enter. They will be lost in magical labyrinth and just mysteriously turned aside, and so on and so on. And the girdle of Melian is going to be exceedingly important later. At this point, we can perhaps also mention that since we dealt with the children of the Valinor elves earlier, there is one important child born in Middle-earth at this time, namely Thingol and Melian's daughter Luthien, later called Tinuviel, the Nightingale. And she is described very simply. First of all, she is descendant of, high light elven nobility and Ainur blood. She is a... Yeah? You can just tell me to shut up. You can do whatever you want.
I'm sorry. I hate that. It's just the girdle of Melian is fascinating to me. It encloses, these basically a bunch of forests and part of the land of, I forget what it was called, like Aelin or something like that.
It's basically the forest of Neldoreth for most of the time.
Yeah, it was Neldoreth region and Nivrim, but and anyway, but here's what happens if you attempt to pass through it. You become lost and you wander aimlessly, and all you see is trees. That's all you can see is trees, and you are eventually die. I mean, it's absolutely a terrible thing to run into, and it protected Doriath from bad influence, and Morgoth couldn't see through it. I mean, it was and like you said, Galadriel used Nenya to protect Lothlorien, right?
Yeah, probably in the same fashion, only less so.
Probably was the same move. Yeah, exactly.
Galadriel, we are getting ahead of ourselves, but Galadriel is going to spend a lot of time in Doriath.
Yes. Okay, but anyway, I just love the idea that that she raises this barrier.
Yeah.
And man, if you go in there with evil intent, you will die of starvation.
Basically, if you go in there and she doesn't want you there, evil intent or not.
Yeah, exactly. If you're done. Which I love that. It just makes me happy.
Like I said, it's mentioned in the Lord of the Rings very specifically that Galadriel with Nenya can protect Lothlorien in the way she does. It's mentioned in the appendices. Sauron's forces from Dol Guldur tries to enter Lothlorien and take it over during the Battle of the War of the Ring. Great bloodshed is made under the trees, and a lot of trees are burned, but there is no real way that Sauron's forces could have destroyed Lothlorien as long as Galadriel is there with the ring. She simply has the power to really keep them out if necessary, unless Sauron himself would have come there and overwhelmed her will. This is basically the same point as Melian's girdle. They can go into the forest edges and start forest fires, they can catch elves, they can do whatever, but as long as Melian is there, no grand scale, no incursions into the lands could happen unless someone came whose will were greater or equal to hers, which, again, probably means only Melkor, maybe Sauron. But Sauron at this point, while Melkor's greatest servant, is not Sauron of later. Sauron of later is actually in some ways more at least willfully powerful in his will than he is in these early days. But anyway, back to the story. So this is the situation now in Middle-earth. Melkor, with his great iron crown, is sitting in his throne in the deepest pits of Angband. His forces have overrun most of Beleriand and are besieging Doriath and the havens of the Falathrim, this coast elves. So far, so good. What happens back in Valinor? And as soon as I think we will end as soon as the elves start going to sea, because we've already been going for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But, well, what happens is that the elves are gathered in Tirion. Remember, Feanor is not allowed back in Tirion. He is basically banned from there for a certain while because of his feud with Fingolfin. But he still comes there and speaks to the people of speaks to the Noldor. And, my father, your king, was killed. He stole our treasures. That piece of fucking shit Ainur did all this to us, and we're going to get revenge. We cannot trust the Valar. They will either keep us here against our will, or just they cannot deal with him, as should be obvious. We have to do something ourselves. We have to gird ourselves for war, go regain what is ours, and kick his fucking Ainur ass up his esophagus. This is the moment where I will stop using the name Melkor, which I have so far tried to do very studiedly. Because this is the moment. This is the moment where, in this speech, Feanor names him Morgoth, the black enemy of the world.
Yep.
And that's the name he is remembered in or used for in the rest of the entire Legendarium.
Right.
From this moment, the only time after this we hear the name Melkor is if he himself speaks or if Sauron speaks about him. Other than that, he is always Morgoth, the black enemy of the world. Anyway, some people think that this is a really bad idea. They should trust the elves should trust the Valar. They can still think of something, or something can be done about this. We have to trust them. But Feanor and his sons, with the wildness of their speeches and the fiery sort of animation of their spirits, eventually convinces everyone to willingly or, well, if not unwillingly, then willingly eagerly or not so eagerly go along with this, and they start setting out for war. This is not good. This is really not good. Many bad things come from this. In the beginning, Feanor tries to convince the Valar to let them go, but the Valar is like, no, please don't do this. Please don't do this. It's going to be bad. It's going to be really bad. Melkor Morgoth is an Ainur, the greatest of us. You can't beat him, guys. You really can't. We will think of something. It might take a while. We will think of something, but no. We are not having that. So the Noldor decides they need to go. So where do they need to go? Well, they need to cross the Great Sea. Aw, puppy.
Hey.
Hey, puppy.
Yep.
Somebody anyway,
going to be on stream, puppers. I'm not turning the camera.
Say hi, everybody. Say hi. My name is Gothmog. Hate and strife. I am the Lord of the Balrogs.
That's a good.
Just
he looks like it.
No. She's a sweetie. If I was going to name her after Lord of the Rings, she would be called Melian.
Oh.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry. This is what happened. We should. Crap! It got away from me. Anyway, the elves want to leave Valinor and go to Middle Earth to take the fight to Morgoth. Before Morgoth come back, we were talking about the child of Thingol and Melian, a girl called Luthien, later called Tinuviel the Nightingale. She is described as the most beautiful woman who ever lived. Like, literally. This is, again, one of those situations where you cannot show this in a picture. She is literally
the embodiment of beauty.
Embodiment of beauty. She's half high elf and half angel.
Yes, exactly. And she's J.R.R. Tolkien's wife.
Yeah, she's J.R.R. Tolkien's wife. He's based her specifically on his wife Edith.
Yeah.
In fact, we'll get back to that later when her husband shows up. Yeah. But you need to remember this name. This most beautiful woman of all time, Luthien. Because we'll get back to her. Anyway, Feanor needs some ships because he doesn't know how to create ships. He can create weapons. He can create jewelry. He can't create ships, but he has these. There is these people, the Teleri, outside in Swanhaven. They have ships. They could probably lend us ships, so they go there. The entire Noldor war host, which is basically the entire people, women and children included, go there and say, "Hey, we need to get over there. Give us your ship, Pluth." And the Teleri says, No. We believe in the Valar. They told us that you should try to stay here, and also, you seem like you are a bit too angry to make rational decisions right now, King Feanor.
Nice.
So, no, we don't think this is a good idea. And Feanor, who is a little bit ahead of the other great Noldor. I mean, the Noldor is basically traveling in three great groups. The Feanor and his sons with their immediate sort of followers, then Fingolfin and his children and their immediate followers, and Finarfin, the last of the sons, and his immediate followers. Feanors are ever in the van, obviously, because they are nuts at this point, driven half insane by the whole anger in them. And when the Teleri refuses to deliver their ships, they say, we're not going to accept that. And they kill them and take their ship. The first great kinslaying. This is one of those things that is very high on Tolkien's list of no-nos. You know, elves should not kill other elves.
Kin should not kill kin.
They should absolutely not.
The kin strife, the kinslaying. I mean,
family is sacred, and to a certain degree, all elves are family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And theoretically, Tolkien didn't like anyone killing anyone.
Right.
I mean, that's
he was reacting to a war. Yeah. Exactly.
No, but in this particular case, we have the Teleri, who probably don't even have any real weapons, except what they can, improvise at the given moment. And Feanor's people slashes their way through Swanhaven, slaughtering everyone they come across and steal their ships. This is, in fact, where the great oath is taken by Feanor and his sons. The oath of Feanor to follow Morgoth until the ending of the world and to consider anyone holding a Silmaril but them as their great enemy to be destroyed or subjugated.
Gee,
as you can imagine, that phrasing is going to come back to haunt us later. But as of right now, they are slaughtering their way through Swanhaven and stealing the ships. Eventually, the other groups of Noldor arrive, and while, of course, horrified by the situation, it's like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, and Feanor is the king, so, shit. Well, we gotta do what they got to do. So the Noldor travel up the coast to get to a point. They're still not, they have the ships now. That still doesn't make them great sailors.
Right.
So they travel up the coast to get to a point where the distance between Valinor and Middle-earth are a bit shorter. And they arrive at a point where, on a great promontory, stands a tall, dark shape. It's either the emissary of Mandos or Mandos himself. Probably Mandos himself, just because that's more cool. And he speaks the judgment of Mandos. This is another one of those situations where people should probably start taking notes because there will be a quiz later.
Mm-hmm.
The judgment of Mandos basically says, we forbid you to do this. We cannot stop you. We won't stop you. But if you in any way consider yourself honor-bound or legally under Valar suzerainty, you will not do this. If you do, you will no longer be sort of under the grace of the elves. You will no pay. This is basically the original sin. He is basically doing the speech of the cherub towards Adam and Eve. You will know sickness, well, not sickness, but they are still elf, but you will know pain, suffering, death, yada, 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 eat your facial sweat on bread, kind of stuff. Yeah. And if you do, you won't be allowed back. If you leave now, if you come back and ask for forgiveness, you will probably get it. But if you go on now, this is the point of no return, guys. You will suffer all of this, and there will be no way anyone will ever aid you again. You will have no respite. There will be no end to this. This will not end well for you, and you won't be allowed back. And Feanor, because he is Feanor, says, "Ha ha ha ha! Fuck you! You are weak and cannot even stop us except talking. We are doing this!" And goes on. At this point, Finarfin, the youngest of Finwë's sons, Galadriel's father, is having second thoughts. He was always closest to his Vanyar mother, and he spent a lot of time amongst the Vanyar, and he repents. He takes his group of Noldor, at least those who are willing to follow him, and goes back to Valinor, where he does, in fact, receive a pardon and forgiveness and is set to rule the small remainder of the Noldor. His children, however, goes along with Feanor. Remember me saying before that Galadriel needed forgiveness to be allowed back across the sea.
Yes.
This was because she did not take part of the kinslaying in any way, but she was one of those leaders who rejected the judgment of Mandos and went on to Middle-earth because, like Feanor in some ways, she wanted a kingdom of her own to rule, guide, structure, order, and grow.
She ate the forbidden fruit.
Yes, arrogance, pride, and ambition.
Yep.
And that meant that even at the ending of the world, where we came down to it, she wouldn't be allowed back. One of the reasons, not the only reason, she liked it there and she had a boyfriend there, husband. But one of the primary reasons Galadriel is still in Middle-earth at the end of the Third Age is that she couldn't go back. They wouldn't let her. The ban of Mandos held her back. And Galadriel's, this is obvious when you read the Silmarillion and the text in between. Galadriel's character arc is basically repenting and making up for the folly of her youth and becoming someone that the Valar is saying, okay, fine, we're allowing you to come back. And they basically did that the moment. I mean, like I said, giving the hairs to Gimli is definitely a moment of it, but the moment she did it was when Frodo offered her the ring and she rejected it. She had in her hand at that point the means to make herself the greatest power in Middle-earth, and she turns it down. And that was the moment where Galadriel showed herself not to be... Galadriel of the kinslaying time would have taken the ring in a fucking heartbeat.
Right.
Galadriel of the Third Age, who have seen so much suffering and suffered so much herself, if nothing else, just what happened to her daughter. We'll get back to what happened to her daughter. We have already kind of mentioned it, but we'll get back to that later. She is willing to give up the ring, and that is what allows her to come back. This also means this ban, however. What happens when you die? Your spirit goes to Mandos. Well, remember what I said about your spirit being the Valar having a sort of duty to God to reincarnate you when you are ready for it? Well, they are allowed to postpone that if they don't feel you are ready. And for those elves who participated in the Noldor expedition, especially those who directly participated in the kinslaying, they are not being allowed back. Some of them will probably eventually being allowed back. We know at least one who wasn't just allowed back, but even sent back to Middle-earth. We'll get to him in a couple of shows.
Yes, exactly. That's
but as a general rule, this is why the Noldor couldn't just get new... they couldn't replenish their numbers just by having their dead fighters come back to life. The Valar basically, at least as long as the war was going on, basically said, you're not being resurrected. And you are definitely not going back to Middle-earth.
And by the way, this is just the side. This is just to plant the seed for a future thing. I don't want to go down this now, but the way that that other being's time in being sent to the halls of Mandos and then being sent back to Earth was treated in the movie was unforgivably trivialized.
That wasn't even the one I was talking about, I think, since he doesn't appear in the movie.
Oh, I was talking about Gandalf. What were you?
I wasn't. I was talking about. What's his face? Elf boy.
Not
the one who in the books brings them to Rivendell.
Yeah, not
Glorfindel,
but
Glorfindel.
Glorfindel. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, Gandalf is not under the ban. He's a Maya. He can come and go as he wants, to a certain degree.
That's true, but he died and came back, and they should have portrayed him going to the halls of Mandos and being spit back out.
No, they really shouldn't. But no, I really don't think so. First of all, that isn't in the book. Two, even in the book, he doesn't say anything like that. He passes out of time and space. More specifically, Gandalf probably went into the timeless void, into the halls, rather than to go back to Mandos. He's a Maya spirit. He wouldn't go to Mandos. He would go out to Eru. And it's true they didn't do much of it, but then again, they didn't do much of it in the book either. What they failed to do in the movies, I think we actually discussed.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think we discussed this already. From Gandalf.
Gandalf. The stupid thing.
No. I want to get this out of the way because I think we discussed this, but I want to hear your comment.
Kill fire.
I want to hear your comments on it. Gandalf in the movies, Gandalf the White, is basically Gandalf the Grey just in war mode. Probably with a bit of power boost. But Gandalf the White and Gandalf the Grey are basically the same person. Played as the same person. Gandalf the Grey in the book is unsure. He is definitely not all-powerful. He makes mistakes. He can be frightened. And he can be sort of, he's a fallible creature. Gandalf the White is basically what Gandalf would be if he was allowed to reveal his angelic nature. He is completely certain of himself. He continues his old plan, but he's completely certain of himself. He no longer makes a mistake, and he is obviously no longer frightened. Gandalf the Grey would have pissed his pants facing the Lord of the Nine. I realize he would have done it because he's still Gandalf, but he would have been scared. Gandalf the White did it with equanimity. And this is the only thing with Gandalf's resurrection I feel the movie made a mistake about, is that they didn't show his divine empowering. Do you follow my line of thought?
Yeah, yep. There very definitely was a change in his
Anyway,
personality.
The Melkor is back. He has overrun most of Beleriand and probably other parts of Middle-earth at this point. The elves remaining over there are under siege. Finwë is dead. Feanor and his sons have murdered the Telleri or many of the Telleri in Swanhaven and stolen their ships. They and Fingolfin's people are moving north on the outside of the Pelori Mountains, with Finarfin returning to Tirion to seek repentance, and the doom of Mandos have been proclaimed. This is where we will end today, and we will start the next one with one of the more... I won't say Feanor redeems himself, because he absolutely don't, but he does have one of the more badass moments of the Silmarillion coming up.
Okay. All right. On that note, join us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, noon Central Standard Time on Maddie's House of Geek for another dive into this Silmarillion. This has been another episode with Skep.
Bye, everybody.
Sage.
Bye.
And me, who didn't have time to do her homework. I will admit that. All the links on how to get a hold of us and, yell at us on Twitter and our other channels are down in the description. So until next time, guys, behave. But if you can't behave, at least be good at it. Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.